Worlds in Collision, Chapter 2. Planet Earth. The planet Earth has a stony shell. The lithosphere, it consists of igneous rock, like granite and basalt, with sedimentary rock on top. The igneous rock is the original crust of the Earth. Sedimentary rock is deposited by water. The inner composition of the Earth is not known. The propagation of seismic waves gives support to the assumption that the shell of the Earth is over 2,000 miles thick on a basis of the gravitational effect of mountain masses, the theory of isostasy. The shell is estimated to be only 60 miles thick. The preference of iron in the shell, or the migration of heavy metals from the core to the shell, has not been sufficiently explained. For these metals to have left the core, they must have been ejected by explosions. And in order to remain spread through the crust, the explosions must have been followed immediately by cooling. If in the beginning the planet was a hot conglomerate of elements, as the nebular as well as the tidal theories assume, then the iron of the globe should have become oxidized and combined with all available oxygen. But for some unknown reason, this did not take place. Thus, the presence of oxygen in the terrestrial atmosphere is unexplained. The water of the oceans contains a large amount of soluble sodium chloride, common salt. Sodium might have been from rocks eroded by rain, but rocks are poor in chlorine, and the proportion of sodium and chlorine in seawater calls for 50 times more chlorine in the igneous rock than it actually contains. The deep strata of igneous rock contains no signs of fossil life. Increased in sedimentary rock are skeletons of marine and land animals, often many layers, one upon the other. Not infrequently, igneous rock is found protruding into sedimentary rock, or even covering it in large areas, pointing to successive eruptions of igneous rock that became heated and molten after there was life on Earth. Upon strata which shows no signs of fossil life are strata containing shells, and sometimes the shells are so numerous as to constitute the entire mass of the rock. They are often found in the hardest rock. Higher strata contain skeletons of land animals, often of extinct species, and not infrequently. Above the strata with the remains of land animals are other strata with marine fauna. The species of the animals, and even their genera, change with the strata. The strata often assume an oblique position, sometimes being almost vertical. Frequently, they are faulted and overturned in many ways. Kuvier, 1769 to 1832, the founder of vertebrate paleontology, or the science of petrified skeletons of animals possessing vertebrae, from fish to man, was much impressed by the picture presented by the sequence of the layers of earth. When the traveler passes over these fertile plains, where gently flowing streams nourish in their course an abundant vegetation, and where soil inhabited by numerous population, adorned with flourishing villages, opulent cities, and superb monuments, is never disturbed by the ravages of war or by the oppression of the powerful. He is not led to suspect that nature also has had her intestine wars, and that the surface of the globe has been broken up by revolutions and catastrophes. But his ideas change soon as he digs into the soil, which now presents so peaceful an aspect. Kuvier thought that great catastrophes had taken place on Earth, repeatedly, changing seabeds into continents and continents into seabeds. He held that genera and species were unchangeable since creation. But observing different animal remains in various levels of Earth, he concluded that catastrophes must have annihilated life in vast areas, leaving the ground for other forms of life. Where did these genera come from? Either they were newly created, or, more likely, they migrated from other parts of the world, which were not at the time also visited by cataclysms. He could not find the cause of these cataclysms. He saw in their traces the problem in geology. It is of most importance to solve. But he realized that in order to resolve it satisfactorily, it would be necessary to discover the cause of these events, an undertaking which presents a difficulty of quite a different kind. He knew only of many fruitless attempts already made, and he did not find himself able to offer a solution. These ideas have haunted, I may almost say have tormented me during my researches among fossil bones. Cuvier's theory of stabilized forms of life and annihilating catastrophes was supplanted by a theory of evolution in geology, Lyell, and biology, Darwin. The mountains are what is left of plateaus eroded by wind and water in a very slow process. Sedimentary rock is detritus of igneous rock eroded by rain, then carried to the sea, and there slowly deposited. Skeletons of birds and of land animals in these rocks are presumed to have belonged to animals that waded close to the shore of the sea in shallow water, died while wading, and were covered in sediment before fish destroyed their cadavers, or the water separated the bones of their skeletons. No widespread catastrophes disrupted the slow and steady process. The theory of evolution, which can be traced to Aristotle, and which was the teaching of Lamarck in the days of Kuvier and Darwin after him, has been generally accepted as truth by natural sciences. For almost 100 years, sedimentary rock covers high mountains, and the highest of all, the Himalayas. Shells and skeletons of sea animals are found there. This means that at some early time fish swam over these mountains. What caused the mountains to rise? A force pushing from within, or pulling from without, or twisting on the sides must have elevated the mountains and lifted continents from the bottom of the sea and submerged other land masses. And that is scary. If we do not know what these forces are, we cannot answer the problem of the origin of the mountains and of continents, wherever on the globe we are faced with it. Here is how the question is put concerning the eastern coast of North America. Not long ago, in a geological sense, the flat plain from New Jersey to Florida was under the sea. At that time, the ocean surf broke directly on the old Appalachian Mountains. Previously, the southeastern part of the mountain structure had sunk below the sea and become covered with a layer of sand and mud, thickened seaward. The wedge-like mass of marine sediments was then uplifted and cut into by rivers, giving the Atlantic coastal plain of the United States. Why was it uplifted? To the westward are the Appalachians. The geologist tells us of the stressful times when a belt of rocks extending from Alabama to Newfoundland was jammed, thrust together to make this mountain system. Why? How was it done? In former times, the sea flooded the region of the Great Plains from Mexico to Alaska and then withdrew. Why this change? The birth of the Cordilleras, again the mystery of mountain making clamors for solution, and so on, all over the world. The Himalayas were under the sea. Now Eurasia is 3 miles or more above the bottom of the Pacific. Why? The problem of mountain making is a vexing one. Many of them, mountains, are composed, tangentially compressed, and overthrust rocks that indicate scores of miles of circumferential shortening in the Earth's crust. Radial shrinkage is woefully inadequate to cause the observed amount of horizontal compression. Therein lies the perplexity of the problem of mountain making. Geologists have not yet found a satisfactory escape from this dilemma. Even authors of textbooks confess their ignorance Why have sea floors of remote periods become the lofty highlands of today? What generates the enormous forces that bend, break, and mash the rocks in mountain zones? These questions still await satisfactory answers. The process of raising the mountains is supposed to have been very slow and gradual. On the other hand, it is clear that igneous rock, already hard, had to become fluid in order to penetrate sedimentary rock or cover it. It is not known what initiated this process, but it is asserted that it must have happened long before man appeared on Earth. So when skulls of early man are found in late deposits, or skulls of modern man are found together with bones of extinct animals in early deposits, difficult problems are presented, occasionally also during mining operations. A human skull is found in the middle of a mountain, under a thick cover of basalt or granite, like the Calaveras skull from California. Human remains and human artifacts of bone, polished stone, or pottery are found under great deposits of till and gravel, sometimes under as much as 100 feet. The origin of clay, sand, and gravel on igneous and sedimentary rock offers a problem. The theory of ice ages was put forth, 1840, to explain this and other enigmatic phenomena. As for north as Spitsbergen, the polar circle, at some time in the past, coral reefs were formed, which do not occur except in tropical regions. Palms also grew on Spitsbergen. The regions, the continent of Antarctica, which today has not a single tree on it, must have been covered at one time by forests, since it has coal deposits. As we see, the planet Earth is full of secrets. We have not come closer to solving the problem of the origin of the solar system by investigating the planet under our feet. On the contrary, we have found many other unsolved problems concerning the lithosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere of the Earth. Shall we be more fortunate if we try to understand the process that caused the changes on the globe in the most recent geological epoch, the time of the last glacial period, close to the time which is regarded as historic? Ice ages. Not many thousands of years ago, we were taught great areas of Europe and North America were covered by glaciers. Perpetual ice lay not only on the slopes of high mountains, but loaded itself in heavy masses upon continents, even in moderate latitudes. Where today the Hudson, the Elbe, and the upper Dnieper flow, there were then frozen deserts. They were like the immense glacier of Greenland that covers that island. There are signs that a retreat of the glaciers was interrupted by new massing of ice, and their borders differed at various times. Geologists are able to find the boundaries of the glaciers. Ice moves very slowly, pushing stones before it, and accumulations of stones, or moraines, remained when glacier retreats melting away. Traces have been found of 5 or 6 consecutive displacements of the ice sheet during the Ice Age, or of 5 or 6 glacial periods. Some force repeatedly pushed the ice sheet toward moderate latitude. Neither the cause of the ice ages nor the cause of the retreat of the ice desert is known. The time of these retreats is also a matter of speculation. Many ideas were offered and guesses made to explain how the glacial epochs originated and why they terminated. Some supposed that the sun, at different times, emits more or less heat, which causes periods of heat and cold on Earth. But no evidence that the sun is such a variable star was adduced to support this hypothesis. Others conjectured that cosmic space has warmer and colder areas, and that when our solar system travels through the cooler areas ice descends upon the latitudes close to the tropics. But no physical agents were found responsible for such hypothetical cold and warm areas in space. A few wondered whether the precession of the equinoxes, or the slow change in the direction of the terrestrial axis, might cause periodic variation in the climate. But it has shown that the difference in isolation could not have been great enough to have been responsible for glacial ages. Still others thought to find the answer with glaciation at the maximal eccentricity. Some of them supposed that winter in aphelion, the remotest part of the ecliptic, would cause glaciation. And some thought that summer in aphelion would produce that effect. Some scholars thought about the changes in position of the terrestrial axis. If the planet Earth is rigid, it is regarded to be L. Kelvin. The axis could not have shifted in geological times by more than 3 degrees. George Darwin. If it were elastic, it would have shifted up to 10 or 15 degrees in a very slow process. The cause of the ice ages was seen by a few scholars in the decrease of the original heat of the planet. The warm periods between the ice ages were attributed to the heat set free by a hypothetical decomposition of organisms in the strata, those to the surface of the ground. The increase and decrease in the action of warm springs were also considered. Others supposed that dust of volcanic origin filled the terrestrial atmosphere and hindered insolation, or, contrariwise, that an increased content of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere obstructed the reflection of heat rays from the surface of the planet. A decrease in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would cause a fall of temperature, Arrhenius. But calculations were made to show that this could not be the real cause of the glacial ages, Angstrom. Changes in the direction of warm currents in the Atlantic Ocean were brought into the discussion, and the Isthmus of Panama was theoretically removed to allow the Gulf Stream to pass into the Pacific at the time of the glacial periods. But it was proved that 2 oceans were already divided in the Ice Age. Besides, a part of the Gulf Stream would have remained in the Atlantic anyway. The periodic retreats of ice between the glacial periods would have required periodic removal and replacement of the Isthmus of Panama. Other theories of equally hypothetic nature were proposed, but the phenomena held responsible for the changes have not been proved to have existed, or to have been able to produce the effect. All the above-mentioned theories and hypotheses fail if they cannot meet a most important condition. In order for ice masses to have been formed, increased precipitation must have taken place. This requires an increased amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, which is the result of increased evaporation from the surface of oceans. But this could be caused by heat only. A number of scientists pointed out this fact and even calculated that in order to produce a sheet of ice as large as that of the Ice Age, the surface of all of the oceans must have evaporated to a depth of many feet. Such an evaporation of oceans followed by a quick process of freezing, even in moderate latitudes, would have produced the Ice Ages. The problem is, what could have caused the evaporation and immediately subsequent freezing as the cause of such quick alternation of heating and freezing of large parts of the globe is not apparent. It is conceded that at present the cause of excessive ice making on the lands remains a baffling mystery, a major question for the future reader of Earth's riddles. Not only are the causes of the appearance and later disappearance of the glacial sheet unknown, that the geographical shape of the area covered by ice is also a problem. Why would the glacial sheet in the southern hemisphere move from the tropical regions of Africa toward the solar polar region and not the opposite direction? And similarly, why in the northern hemisphere did ice move in India from the equator toward the Himalaya mountains and the higher latitudes? Why did the glaciers of the Ice Age cover the greater part of North America and Europe, while the north of Asia remained free? In America, the plateau of ice stretched up from latitude 40 degrees and even passed across this line in Europe. It reached latitude 50 degrees, while northeastern Siberia, above the polar circle, even at latitude 75 degrees, was not covered with this perennial ice. All hypotheses regarding increased diminished isolation due to solar alterations or the changing temperature of the cosmic space or other similar hypotheses cannot avoid being confronted with this problem. Glaciers are formed in regions of eternal snow. For this reason, they remain on the slopes of the high mountains. The north of Siberia is the coldest place in the world. Why did not the Ice Age touch this region, whereas it visited the basin of the Mississippi and all Africa south of the equator? No satisfactory solution to this question has been proposed.
The mammoths. Northeast Siberia, which was not covered by ice in the Ice Age, conceals another enigma. The climate there has apparently changed drastically since the end of the Ice Age, and the yearly temperature has dropped many degrees below its previous level. Animals once lived in this region that do not live there now, and plants grew there that are ungrowable now. The change must have occurred quite suddenly. The cause of this, Climasters, has not been explained. In this catastrophic change of climate, and under mysterious circumstances, all the mammoths of Siberia perished. The mammoth belonged to the family of elephants. Its tusks were sometimes as much as 10 feet long. Its teeth were highly developed, and their density was greater than in any other stage in the evolution of the elephants. Apparently, they did not succumb in the struggle for survival as an unfit product of evolution. The extinction of the mammoth is thought to have coincided with the end of the last glacial period. Tusks of mammoth have been found in large amounts in northeastern Siberia. This well-preserved ivory has been an object of export to China and Europe ever since the Russian conquest of Siberia, and was exploited in even earlier times. In modern times, the ivory market of the world still found its main source of supply in the tundras of northeast Siberia. In 1799, the frozen bodies of mammoths were found in these tundras. The corpses were well preserved, and the sled dogs ate the flesh unharmed. The flesh is fibrous and marbled, with fat, and looks as fresh as well-frozen beef. What was the cause of their death and the extinction of their race? Kuvier wrote of the extinction of the mammoths. Repeated eruptions and retreats of the sea have neither all been slow nor gradual. On the contrary, most of the catastrophes which have occasioned them have been sudden, and this is especially easy to be proved with regard to the last of these catastrophes, that which, by a twofold motion, has inundated and afterwards laid dry our present continents, or at least a part of the land which forms them. At the present day, in the northern regions, it has left the carcasses of large quadrupeds which became enveloped in the ice, and have thus been preserved, even to our own times, with their skin, their hair, and their flesh. If they had not been frozen as soon as killed, they would have been decomposed by putrefaction. And on the other hand, this eternal frost could not previously have occupied the places in which they have been seized by it, for they could not have lived in such a temperature. It was, therefore, at one and the same moment that these animals were destroyed, and the country which they inhabited became covered with ice. This event has been sudden, instantaneous, without any gradations, so with reference to those which have preceded it. The theory of repeated catastrophes annihilating life on this planet and repeated creations or restorations of life offered by Dulac and expanded on by Kuvier did not convince the scientific world like Lamarck before Kuvier. Darwin, after him, thought that an exceedingly slow evolutional process governs genetics and that there were no catastrophes interrupting these processes of infinitesimal changes. According to the theory of evolution, these minute changes came as a result of adaptation to living conditions and the struggle of the species for survival, like the theories of Lamarck and Darwin, which postulate slow changes in animals with tens of thousands of years required for a minute step in evolution. The geological theories of the 19th century and of the 20th century as well regard the geological processes as exceedingly slow and dependent on erosion by rain, wind, and tides. Darwin admitted that he was unable to find an explanation for the extermination of the mammoth, an animal better developed than the elephant, which survived. But in conformity with the theory of evolution, his followers supposed that a gradual sinking of the land forced the mammoths to the hills, where they found themselves isolated by marshes. However, geological processes are slow. The mammoths would not have been trapped on the isolated hills. Besides, this theory cannot be true because the animals did not die of starvation. In their stomachs and between their teeth, undigested grass and leaves were found. This, too, proves that they died from a sudden cause. Further investigation showed that the leaves and the twigs found in their stomachs do not grow in the regions where the animals died, far to the south, 1,000 or more miles away. It is apparent that the climate has changed radically since the death of the mammoths, as the bodies of the animals were found not decomposed but well preserved in the blocks of ice, the change in temperature must have followed their death very closely, or even caused it. There remains to be added after storms in the Arctic. Tusks of mammoths are washed up on the shores of Arctic islands. This proves that a part of the land where the mammoths lived and were drowned is covered by the Arctic Ocean.
The Ice Age and the Antiquity of Man. The mammoth lived in the Age of Man. Man pictured it on the walls of caves. Remains of men have repeatedly been found in Central Europe together with the remains of mammoths. Occasionally, the settlements of Neolithic man of Europe are found strewn with the bones of mammoths. Man moved southward when Europe was covered with ice, and returned when the ice retreated. Historical man witnessed great variation in climate. The man of Siberia, the meat of which is still fresh, is supposed to have been destroyed at the end of the last glacial period, simultaneously with the mammoths of Europe and Alaska. If this is so, the Siberian mammoth was also the contemporary of a rather modern man. At the time when Europe, close to the ice sheet, man was still in the later stages of Neolithic culture, in the Near and Middle East, the region of the great cultures of antiquity. He may already have progressed well into the Metal Age. There exists no chronological table of Neolithic culture because the art of writing was invented approximately at the advent of the copper, the early period of the Bronze Age. It is presumed that the Neolithic man of Europe left pictures but no inscriptions, and consequently there are no means of determining the end of the Ice Age in terms of chronology. Geologists have tried to find the time of the end of the last glacial period by measuring the detritus carried by rivers from the glaciers and the deposits of detritus in lakes. The quantity carried by the Rhone from the glaciers of the Alps and the amount on the bottom of Lake Geneva, through which the Rhone flows, were calculated, and from the figures obtained the time and velocity of the retreat of the glacial sheet of the last glacial period were estimated. According to the Swiss scholar Francis Forel, 12,000 years have passed since the time the ice sheet of the last glacial period began to melt, an unexpectedly low figure, as it was thought that the ice age ended 30 to 50,000 years ago. Such calculations suffer from being only indirect evaluations, and since the velocity at which the glacial mud had been deposited in the lakes was not constant and the amount varied, the mud must have assembled on the bottom of the lake at a faster rate in the beginning when the glaciers were larger, and if the ice age terminated suddenly, the deposition of detritus would have been much heavier at first, and there would be little analogy to the accumulation of detritus from the seasonal melting of snow in the Alps. Therefore, the time that has elapsed since the end of the last glacial period must have been even shorter than reckoned. Geologists regard the Great Lakes of America as having been formed at the end of the Ice Age, when continental glacier retreated and the depressions freed from glacier became lakes. In the last 200 years, Niagara Falls has retreated from Lake Ontario toward Lake Erie at a rate of about 5 feet annually, washing down the rocks of the bed of the falls. This process has been going on at the same rate since the end of the last glacial period. About 7,000 years were needed to move Niagara Falls from the mouth of the gorge at the Queenston to its present position. The assumption that the quantity of water moving through the gorge has been uniform since the end of the Ice Age is the basis of this calculation, and therefore it has concluded 7,000 years may constitute the maximum length of time since the birth of the falls. In the beginning, when immense masses of water were released by the retreat of the continental glacier, the rate of movement of Niagara Falls must have been much more rapid. The time estimate may need significant reduction, and is sometimes lowered to 5,000 years. The erosion and sedimentation of the shores and the bottom of Lake Michigan also suggest a lapse of time counted in thousands, but not in tens of thousands of years. Also, the result of paleontological research in America carries evidence which constitutes a guarantee that before the last period of glaciation, modern man in the form of that highly developed race, the American Indian, was living on the eastern seaboard of North America. It is assumed that with the advent of the last glacial period, the Indians retreated southward, returning to the north when the ice uncovered the ground, and when the Great Lakes emerged, the basin of St. Lawrence was formed, and Niagara Falls began its retreat toward Lake Erie. If the end of the last glacial period occurred only a few thousand years ago, in historical times, or at a time when the art of writing may have been already employed in the centers of ancient civilization, the records written in the rocks by nature and the records written by man must give a coordinated picture. Let us therefore investigate the traditions and the literary records of ancient man and compare them with the records of nature. The world ages. A conception of ages that were brought to their end by violent changes in nature is common all over the world. The number of ages differs from people to people and tradition to tradition. The difference depends on the number of catastrophes that the particular people retained in its memory, or on the way it reckoned the end of an age. In the annals of ancient Etruria, according to Varro, were records of 7 elapsed ages. Censorinus, the author of the 3rd Christian century and compiler of Varro, wrote that men thought that different prodigies appeared by means of which the gods notified mortals at the end of each age. The Etruscans were versed in the science of the stars, and after having observed the prodigies with attention, they recorded these observations in their books. The Greeks had similar traditions. Where is a period, wrote Censorinus, called the supreme year by Aristotle, at the end of which the sun, the moon, and all the planets return to their original position. This supreme year has a great winter, called by the Greeks cataclysmos, which means deluge, and a great summer, called by the Greeks ekryposis, or combustion of the world. The world actually seems to be inundated and burned alternately in each of these epochs. Anaximensis and Anaximander in the 6th pre-Christian century, and Diogenes of Apollonia in the 5th century, assumed the destruction of the world with subsequent reaction. Heraclitus, minus 540 to minus 475, taught that the world is destroyed in conflagration after every period of 10,800 years. Aristarchus of Samos in the 3rd century before the present era taught that in a period of 2,484 years, the earth undergoes 2 destructions, the combustion and deluge. The Stoics generally believed in periodic conflagrations, by which the world was consumed to be shaped anew. This is due to the forces of ever-active fire which exist in things, and in the course of long cycles of time resolves everything into itself, and out of it is constructed a reborn world. So Philo presented the notion of the Stoics that our world is refashioned in periodic conflagrations. In one such catastrophe, the world will meet its ultimate destruction. Colliding with another world, it will fall apart into atoms, out of which, in a long process, a new earth will be created somewhere in the universe. Democritus and Epicurus explained. Philo postulate many worlds, the origin of which they ascribe to the mutual impacts of interlacing of atoms, and their destruction to the counterblows and collisions by the bodies so formed. As this earth goes to its ultimate destruction, it passes through reoccurring cosmic catastrophes and is reformed with all that lives on it. Hesiod, one of the earliest Greek authors, wrote about 4 ages and 4 generations of men that were destroyed by the wrath of the planetary gods. The 3rd age, the age of bronze, when it was destroyed by Zeus. A 3rd generation repeopled the earth, and using bronze for arms and tools, they began to use iron too. Heroes of the Trojan War were of this 4th generation. Then a new destruction was decreed, and after that came yet another generation, the 5th, of men who are upon the bounteous earth. The generation of iron, in another work of his, Hesiod described the end of one of the ages. The life-giving earth crashed around in burning. All the land seethed, and the ocean streams. It seemed even as if earth and the wide heaven above came together, for such a mighty crash would have arisen if earth were being hurled to ruin, and heaven from on high were hurling her down. Analogous traditions of 4 expired ages persist on the shores of the Bengal Sea and in the highland of Tibet. The present age is the 5th. The sacred Hindu book, Bhagavad Purana, tells of 4 ages and of pralayas, or cataclysms, which in various epochs mankind was nearly destroyed. The 5th age is that of the present. The world ages are called kalpas, or yugas. Each world age met its destruction in catastrophes of conflagration, flood, and hurricane. Azur Vedam, or Bhaga Vedam, sacred Hindu hooks, keeping to the scheme of 4 expired ages, differ only in the number of years ascribed to each. In the chapter World Cycles, in Visuddhimagga, it is said that there are 3 destructions: the destruction by water, destruction by fire, and destruction by wind, but that there are 7 ages, each of which is separated from the previous one by a world catastrophe. Reference to ages and catastrophes is found in Avesta, Zendavesta, the sacred scriptures of Mazdaism, the ancient religion of the Persians. Bahman Yast, one of the books of Avesta, counts 7 world ages or millennia. Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, the prophet of Mazdaism, speaks of the signs of wonders and perplexity which are manifested in the world at the end of each millennium. The Chinese call the perished ages Kis, and number 10 Kis from the beginning of the world, until Confucius, in the ancient Chinese encyclopedia Sing Li Ta Sien Chao, the general convulsions of nature are discussed. Because of the periodicity of these convulsions, the span of time between 2 catastrophes is regarded as a great year. As during a year, so during a world age, the cosmic mechanism winds itself up, and in a general convulsion of nature, the sea is carried out of its bed, mountains spring out of the ground, rivers change their course, human beings and everything are ruined, and the ancient traces effaced. An old tradition, and a very persistent one, of world ages that went down in cosmic catastrophes was found in the Americas among the Incas, the Aztecs, and the Mayas. A major part of stone inscriptions found in Yucatan refer to world catastrophes. The most ancient of these fragments, calendar stones of Yucatan, refer in general to great catastrophes which at intervals and repeatedly convulsed the American continent, and of which all nations of this continent have preserved a more or less distinct memory. Codices of Mexico and Indian authors who composed the annals of their past give a prominent place to the tradition of world catastrophes that decimated humankind and changed the face of the earth. In the chronicles of the Mexican kingdom, it is said, the ancients knew, before the present sky and earth were formed, man was already created and life had manifested itself 4 times. A tradition of successive creations and catastrophes is found in the Pacific, on Hawaii, and on the islands of Polynesia. There were 9 ages, and in each age a different sky was above the earth. Icelanders, too, believed that 9 worlds went down in a succession of ages, a tradition that is contained in the Edda. The rabbinical conception of ages crystallized in the post-exilic period. Already before the birth of our earth, worlds had been shaped and brought into existence only to be destroyed in time. He made several worlds before ours, but he destroyed them all. This earth, too, was not created at the beginning to satisfy the divine plan. It underwent reshaping 6 consecutive remoldings. New traditions were created after each of the catastrophes. On the 4th earth lived the generation of the Tower of Babel. We belong to the 7th age. Each of the ages or earths has a name. 7 heavens were created, and 7 earths were created. The most removed, the 7th. Eretz, the 6th. Adama, the 5th. Arka, the 4th. Haraba, the 3rd. Yeshiba, the 2nd. Tevel, and our own land called Helid. And like the others, it is separated from the foregoing by abyss, chaos, and water. Great catastrophes changed the face of the earth. Some perished by deluge. Others were consumed by conflagration, wrote the Jewish philosopher Philo. According to the rabbinical authority Rashi, ancient tradition knows of periodic collapses of the firmament, one of which occurred in the days of the deluge, and which repeated themselves at intervals of 1,656 years. The duration of world ages varies in Armenian and Arabian traditions.
The Sun Ages. An oft-repeated occurrence in the tradition of world ages is the advent of the new sun in the sky at the beginning of every age. The word sun is substituted for the word age in the cosmogonical traditions of many peoples all over the world. The Mayas counted their ages by the names of the consecutive suns. These are called water sun, earthquake sun, hurricane sun, fire sun. These suns mark the epochs to which are attributed the various catastrophes the world has suffered. Ixtlcatl, 1568 to 1648, the native Indian scholar, in his Animals of the Kings of Tezcuco, described the world ages by the names of the suns. The water sun, or sun of waters, was the first age, terminated by a deluge in which almost all creatures perished. The earthquake sun, or age, perished in a terrific earthquake. Earth broke up in many places. Mountains fell. The world age of the hurricane sun came to its destruction in a cosmic hurricane. The fire sun was the world age that went down in a rain of fire. The nations of Culha, or Mexico, Humboldt quoted Gomara, the Spanish writer of the 16th century, believed, according to their hieroglyphic paintings, that previous to the sun, which now enlightens them, 4 had already been successfully extinguished. These 4 suns are as many ages, in which our species has been annihilated by inundations, by earthquakes, by general conflagration, and by the effect destroying tempests. Every one of the 4 elements participated in each of the catastrophes. Deluge, hurricane, earthquake, and fire gave their names to the catastrophes because of the predominance of one of them in the upheavals. Symbols of the successive suns are pointed on the pre-Columbian literary documents of Mexico. Cinco soles que son dedes, or 5 suns that are epics, wrote Gomara in his description of the conquest of Mexico. An analogy to this sentence of Gomara may be found in
Lucius Simpelius, a Roman author, who in his book Liber Memoralis
wrote,
Soles figure quinque.
There were 5 suns. In this, the same belief that Gomara found in the New World. The Mexican annals of, and all these names, I apologize if I can't pronounce them right, of Caotitlan, written in Nahu Indian circa 1570, and based on ancient sources, contains the tradition of 7 sun epochs. Chican and Tonatiuh, or the 7 suns, is the designation for the world cycles or acts in the cosmic drama. The Buddhist sacred book of Visuddhimagga contains a chapter on world cycles. There are 3 destructions: the destruction by water, the destruction by fire, the destruction by wind. After the catastrophe of the deluge, and now a long period has elapsed from the cessation of the rains, a second sun appeared. In the interim, the world was enveloped in gloom. When this second sun appears, there is no distinction of day and night, but an incessant heart beats upon the world. When the 5th sun appeared, the ocean gradually dried up. When the 6th sun appeared, the whole world became filled with smoke. After the lapse of another long period, a 7th sun appears. and the whole world breaks into flames. This Buddhist book refers also to a more ancient discourse on the seven suns. The Brahmins called the epochs between two destructions the great days. The Sibylline books recite the ages in which the world underwent destruction and regeneration. The Sibyl told as follows: the 9 suns are 9 ages. Now is the 7th sun. The Sibyl prophesies 2 ages yet to come, that of the 8th and 9th sun. The Aborigines of British North Borneo even today declare the sky was originally low, and that 6 suns perished, and at present the world is illuminated by the 7th sun. The 7 solar ages are referred to in the Mayan manuscripts, in Buddhist sacred books, in the books of the Sibyl. It's spelled S-I-B-Y-L. I'm just taking that as another way to use an I, Sibyl. In all quoted sources, the suns are explained in the sources themselves as signifying consecutive epochs, each of which went down in great general destruction. Did the reason for the substitution of the word sun by the peoples of both hemispheres lie in that changed appearance of the luminary and in its path in each epoch as its world age? There. That's how slow light leaves, right there. There's no way that Earth, oops, I keep leaving more light pulses. There's no way that Earth can orbit the sun. That's on that time scale. It would orbit it where it was 8 minutes ago. There's no way it can do that. And that is that whole thing right there. Once you can wrap your head around that, well, for me, that was the clincher. The sun and the Earth are in real time, and the galaxy is in real time. It can't. That pokey speed right there, it can't know where itself is at that speed. That's pokey. That's slow. At this rate, it'll take 8 minutes for the ring to go out from the sun and get to the Earth. So that's why the Earth has to orbit the sun in real time. If you would have no order at all, if this was orbiting this where it was 8 minutes ago, it just wouldn't make sense. Neither would the galaxy. So that's a huge point in the electric universe's favor.